you've got to have figured out what the dialogue will be, what will be the questions that you ask that will help bring the buyer to their own conclusions.
Hello, I've got Bill Carson with me again. Welcome back, Bill.
Thanks, John. Great to be back again.
Hey, Bill, we had a great discussion last time about questions, discovery,
Yes.
taking the customer on a thinking journey,
Yes.
and I've loved that terminology. In thinking about discovery, at the end of that, you obviously need to work out how you're going to bring some value to the table,
Yes.
or help the customer think through how they will create value.
Yes.
So the subject of value proposition is something I'd like to discuss.
Yes, fantastic.
When we use the words value proposition, what comes to mind to you? What do you mean by value proposition?
Yeah, it's a great question. See, what we need to be bringing to the table, to our buyers, to our prospects, is this whole concept of value and having a creating value mindset.
But from a customer's perspective, not from our perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Big distinction, very, very important. Now, words that are being put around that these days are commercial insights, for example. Now, so in preparing our value proposition, thinking about it and the person that we're meeting with, well, we've got to recognise that the value proposition elements are specific to individual buyers that we're meeting with.
Right.
So, for example, procurement have a version of value proposition that's different to HR, that's different to an economic buyer, the buyer that's got the money, got the budget.
To the
So these
CEO,
things-
to anybody. You know,
Absolutely.
everybody's got something, a different perspective on a subject.
Exactly, yeah. And so it's our capacity to generate our conversation, our questions that are aligned specifically to that individual's needs, issues, challenges, problems and opportunities. And then we align our value proposition to that individual, which becomes a total commercial insight value proposition overall.
Overall, so that's. I think you just might have just answered the question, but you're saying the value proposition will be tailored for each individual you're talking to, but you're talking about one common value proposition that is adapted for each individual?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, definitely. Sometimes it can vary, though, in the sense that there's an overall strategy, value offering that you're going to be bringing to the overall client in terms of what you've identified, and how that gets articulated to each particular key decision maker is critically important.
Now, early in this conversation, you used the words commercial insight and value proposition almost in the same sentence, and
Yes.
they mean the same thing. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not sure you meant that. To me, bringing commercial insight to the table is something we do with the customer.
Yes.
And out of that may flow a new way of thinking for the customer
Yes.
that ultimately drives value in their business. So
Yeah.
the commercial insight is not the value proposition. The value proposition is likely to flow from that thinking discussion you
Spot
have
on.
around
Yes.
the commercial insight.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's critically important to recognise the two of them, because often what we can go into is our value proposition, which becomes an imposing process. Whereas if we are coming at it from a blending of the commercial insight, how we're bringing some differentiation in the thinking, and then how our value proposition, how we differentiate ourselves from our competitors or what they're currently doing, the status quo, relative to the importance to each individual is critically important.
And you touched there on the subject of a value proposition to some people is something we create before we even meet with the
Yep.
customer, and that's not a value proposition. That may be an elevator speech or whatever as something we do to try and bring value to customers.
Yes.
But it's not until you're having the dialogue, the thinking dialogue with your customer,
Yeah, exactly.
that you get to a value proposition that's unique and special for that customer.
Exactly, and if we think of the words, it's the proposition of value, the proposing of value. So it's fundamentally, you can only be proposing value when you've got a really good understanding of what the needs are. Because otherwise, if you go in with your value prop that you've worked out, it's really only advantages or features.
Okay, so let's draw this to a conclusion. The real key message that you're bringing to the table, as
Yes.
I understand it, is that the value proposition, you'll have an overall strategic value proposition,
Yep.
but you need to then adapt and tailor that to every individual you're talking to within
Absolutely.
an organisation
Yep.
to make sure it's clear in their mind,
Yes.
and ultimately to get the group of people together, understanding what their value is, but being able to collaboratively make that decision.
Absolutely. And what's critical around that, John, is that you've got to have figured out what the dialogue will be, what will be the questions that you ask that will help bring the buyer to their own conclusions, as I touched on in an earlier session together, that aligns the value prop with their needs.
I love it. Very succinct, and thank you very much. I think there'll be a lot of value for the audience out there, Bill.
Thanks, John. Pleasure.